and I welcome you to this first symposium that we're having. Our moderator for this session will be Matt Fash. Matt is a high school teacher and also works with the U.S. Navy Memorial Veterans History Project team. Matt travels around and interviews and films service members to preserve their personal life experiences, providing a living history of experiences and stories. On our panel this morning, we have 6 persons who have lived the experiences we are talking about at this time. Mike Train, United States Navy and Army, is part of the helicopter crew with special operations. Mike was 19 years old when he took part in his first mission, and before his 20th birthday, he had already been shot down 3 times. Once he and his crew were missing for 30 days and presumed missing in action, Mike completed a total of 563 rescue missions behind enemy lines. Also, we have Colonel Mike Clough, United States Marine Corps. Mike was the 1st Marine Division in Danang. He was in the Tet Offensive, H&S Company, and 3rd Amtrak Danang. Also, Lieutenant Colonel Carl Fontenot, United States Marine Corps. Colonel Fontenot was commanding officer of the 3rd Tank Battalion and also served as the Chief of Staff G3 Plans, Combat Support Northern Corps Tactical Zone, and received a Bronze Star for his action. Lieutenant General Dale Vassar, United States Army commanding 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry Air Assault, awarded 2 Legions of Merit, among other citations. Also, we have Captain Douglas Cone, United States Army, retired. He graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point, 1968, and volunteered for Vietnam. An airborne ranger, he served as a recon platoon leader in the 1st Cavalry Division in the jungles of Cambodia, along the Cambodian border. He was medically retired as a captain after convalescing from gunshot wounds to the head, neck, chest, abdomen, leg, and hand. His awards include 2 Silver Stars and the Purple Heart. Finally, we have Lieutenant Jack Hammond, United States Navy Reserve. He was an air intelligence officer with the Air Wing 21 on the USS Hancock. His aircraft carrier launched the first sustained strikes of the war from an aircraft carrier. Would you join me in welcoming this distinguished group?
Good morning and welcome. My name is Matthew Fash, and it is an honor to be with you all today as the moderator of this panel focusing on the Vietnam War experience. I would like to personally thank Fred Johnson and the Vinson Hall retirement community for their invitation and their hospitality. For the past 8 years, I've had the privilege of participating as the National Coordinator of the United States Navy Memorial Stories of Service program. Fred has been a tremendous supporter of our oral history program and has invited our film crews to Vinson Hall over the past 8 years to document the stories of their residents. The Stories of Service program at the Navy Memorial was designed to be a nationwide initiative, interviewing those who served from all eras and preserve their memories to pass them on to future generations of Americans. Through our efforts, we have successfully interviewed hundreds of our nation's veterans and look forward to continuing our efforts and expanding the program in the future. Throughout this conference, all participants will have the opportunity to meet with our film crews, and we encourage you to share your story and have your memories preserved. Last year, the program grew to include the Student Interview Program, a new initiative launched by the Navy Memorial, which encourages our younger generations to interview their loved ones and those in their school communities who have served, all to further the mission of preserving the past one story at a time. In addition to my work at the Navy Memorial, I am proud to be a history teacher in southeastern Pennsylvania. Events like these are vital to our nation's past that all students should have access to, and our audience today is fortunate to hear the past come to life through the memories of our veteran panel. We are here today to honor those who have served in the Vietnam War, to thank them for their service to our nation and hear firsthand their experiences. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Michael Clough, United States Marine Corps, Lieutenant Colonel Carl Fountanon, United States Marine Corps, Staff Sergeant Michael Train, United States Army, General Vesser, United States Army, Lieutenant Jack Hannon, United States Navy, Captain Douglas Cohn, United States Army. Our first talking point reads, gentlemen, would you share with us when you first learned of the United States military involvement in Vietnam and share your memories when you went overseas to Southeast Asia for the first time? We will start with Colonel Michael Clough.
Good morning, everybody. You're all right. I was at Quantico, Virginia as a second lieutenant, and I was dating a beautiful young lady from Mary Washington College. And unfortunately, I didn't realize that she would come into my life, so I accepted orders to Okinawa upon graduation from basic school and immediately went to Okinawa. While in Okinawa, I was on the staff of the 9th Marines. And on my birthday, 1 November 1963, I was at the club celebrating my birthday when an announcement came. All officers report to your duty stations. I did, to find out that we were going to go, there was a coup in Vietnam, and we were going to fly to Vietnam to help evacuate the embassy if necessary. I was reluctant, but I had to go. So I got ready and we sat on our footlockers for a few days and we got in airplanes and we started flying. We got down to Taiwan, then Formosa, and the whole incident got called off and we turned around and came back. So I did not get in Vietnam, but that was my first experience. Then I came back after to Okinawa, or went to Vietnam rather, leaving my then new bride and a young child behind, and I was in Vietnam in 1967, and that's where I started out my experience in Vietnam.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from Captain Douglas Cohn.
Can you hear me all right? I went to West Point. I had decided to go to Vietnam right from the beginning. I volunteered to go to Vietnam, and when I left for Vietnam, the plane that I was on landed for a stopover at Guam, and that was interesting because the boy that grew up next door to my mother, Harold Meyer, had been killed in Guam during World War II, and that struck me as somewhat ominous. And the interesting thing about going to Vietnam like that, when you land, you're landing among strangers. You basically don't know anybody there, and you proceed from that to the field. And when you get to the field, you go from having been around strangers to being around some of the people that will be your best friends for life.
Thank you. We'll now hear from General Vesser.
I was teaching at West Point, government, history, political philosophy, and economics, and my students were asking many questions about what was happening in Vietnam. What did it mean to be an advisor? In any event, by the time my first tour in Vietnam was over, 17 of my former students were buried in the West Point Cemetery. By the time my second tour was over, there were nearly 40.
Thank you, sir. And the final to share this question, second to last, will be Sergeant Michael Train.
First of all, I was born into the Navy. My father was in Pearl Harbor. My father died when I was very young. My mother remarried another sailor who turned out to be my recruiter and swore me in. Thanks, Dad. At any rate, his encouragement for me was to go to special schools that the Navy offered. He said the Navy offers some of the best special training of all the forces. He would truly believe that. So at his urging, I started doing that. As a result of that, the Army was looking for, actually it was a combined forces operation that I was involved in. We had people from every branch of the service. Let me get back to how I knew about Vietnam. My stepfather was a history buff. So I learned about Vietnam when I was probably 6 years old, about what was happening, what was going on. So I was always kept appraised by my stepfather about what was happening. And as I got older, I was old enough to read about it in the news. But at any rate, I was scheduled to leave the East Coast on a ship that was going on a world tour. And that was, it was a freedom tour. Which meant every day, or you got paid every 2 weeks. So every payday you pulled into a new foreign port for a week to stimulate their economy. 3 days out at sea, I was called and told to pack my sea bag. There was a helicopter coming over to pick me up. And this began what I like to refer to as an odyssey that I will never forget in my life. Nobody knew where I was going. I had no idea. I didn't know until I landed at Lupao Air Force Base in Thailand. I was picked up by a colonel who enlightened me to why I was there. He said, your records show all these special schools. One of those schools triggered us looking at your records. And that became the beginning of my odyssey during Vietnam. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question. Gentlemen, please share the role that you played in the Vietnam War and where you were stationed. We will start first with Lieutenant Colonel Carl Fontana.
Let's see, when I first reported into Vietnam, I was a major, and I was assigned to the tank battalion, the 3rd Tank Battalion, as the executive officer. About 3 months or so later, I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, so they pulled me up to 3rd Marine Division. I was in the plan section. I was a junior lieutenant colonel in the plan section, so I had all the plums. I got Agent Orange. That was my little pet, and along with waterway control. And I had the pleasure of being the CIA liaison, which meant I get to go out with the cards people when they ran operations in the villages and looked at various rice paddies and things, and it was interesting. And occasionally we got to plan large operations too. That's what we were there for. Later on, just before when the Tet Offensive started, well actually before it started, when Tet started the truce, I was moved back down to the Tank Battalion as CO. And I was also assigned as Task Force Robbie CO, which was a Division Reserve. And that about sums it up.
Thank you. We will now hear from Lieutenant Jack Hannon, United States Navy.
You've already heard that I was in the role of Air Intelligence Officer with an air wing on a carrier. There are those who believe there are as many misnomers in that title as in meals ready to eat. But anyway, we pass beyond that. I want to give you 2 vignettes from my second 9-month tour with the carrier. First, before we even left, the ship was at Carrier Pier, San Diego, on August 2nd, 1964. There was a very high-level DoD official making a tour, and I had been tagged to prepare and present an intelligence briefing. About an hour before he was to come on board, we discovered the first report of the Gulf of Tonkin incident. where, as you recall, the destroyer Maddox was fired on by 3 North Vietnamese patrol craft. I quickly realized that my prepared briefing was toast. We had here an event that was likely to be quite profound, although we didn't know how it would work out. And I briefed this official based on the TV reports I jotted down in the wardroom and rushed into the briefing space to present. Fast forward 6 months, the Hancock is now on station 75 miles off Danang in the northern part of South Vietnam. The president makes his momentous decision to intervene militarily with everything we had. And of course, the 3 carriers at Yankee Station were immediately assigned offensive targets, and off we went. There was a scene right out of the movies, ladies and gentlemen, with all the pilots in the wardroom. The intelligence officers gave their briefing, the meteorologist, whom we refer to respectfully but always as the weather guesser, and the air wing commander. And off they went. The ordnance folks had written all kind of messages in chalk or whatever they had on the ordnance we were going to deliver. And the island structure, which is where the ship is navigated from, and the air wing commander has his place in the back end of the island, was crammed, every nook and cranny of it, with people seeing the first strikes off. So that was a second momentous occasion. Over the next 3 months, there were planes that landed back on board that we would have said were not airworthy enough to come back to the carrier. Others had to go to Danang, and thank God for Danang, as you'll hear from other panelists, because they couldn't fly to the ship. And others, of course, didn't come back at all. Several of the A-1s, the single-engine propeller plane that had served so well in Korea, flew too low and too slow for Vietnam, and so some of our pilots' names are on that wall. And my boss, Ray Voden, became the 5th Airman captured in Vietnam. Ray lives in McLean now. I had hoped he would be able to attend, but he was not able to. But that was our experience of the early part of the war from the Navy's standpoint.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from General Vesser.
I was initially trained for a job that didn't exist, so I ended up as a Revolutionary Development Plans officer in J-33 MACV. We hung out in a Vietnamese ministry that overlooked the Capitol building, but we were meant to be coordinating all the efforts of MACV with state, AID, CIA, etc. before Corps was formed and the military took all that over. I managed to get to 30 of the 44 provinces coordinating with district and province chiefs, as well as work with Mont Yards before the fog of war dispelled enough for me that I knew that the government we were trying to support, which had a structure based on the French imperial colonial system, could never deliver what we were trying to deliver in the pacification area. So I volunteered to join the fighters and joined Big Red 1, the Quarter Horse, the Armored Reconnaissance Squadron, which also had all the gunships, hunter-killer teams, long-range reconnaissance patrols, etc., plus 3 ground troops and armored cavalry as the operations officer. The day I was scheduled to become the XO, the commander was seriously wounded He was gone for 59 days, so I commanded the squadron during that period of time. Then when he came back and I turned down the opportunity to command an infantry battalion, I was the XO, but at night they sent me off to defend places that signal intelligence indicated were going to be attacked, and they had inexperienced junior officers in command, and they wanted a field grade officer who was combat experienced. Came back and was sent back to Vietnam just at the time, just before the mini Tet Offensive, and watched 200 rockets come in, and I was meant to be evaluating the Riverine Force. Admiral Zumwalt had done great work, but I visited my former unit, and they had had a major victory over North Vietnamese units attacking Saigon. So I visited them in the field, then I visited the Riverine Force, which was really doing well. Subsequently, when I was on the National Security Council staff, Kissinger sent me to Thailand to evaluate the Chinese-led insurgency against Thailand. And I was in Chiang Mai and various places in the jungle, but the Thais didn't need any help from us. They were doing just fine, thank you. My second full tour in Vietnam, I was a deputy brigade commander of the 1st Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division initially. There had been a fight on Kissinger's staff over whether we should go into Cambodia or not. I was for it. My boss was against it. He resigned. I went to Vietnam. In any event, 3 weeks after I got there, 1 week after I got there, we went into Cambodia on May Day, and 10 days later, the brigade headquarters helicopter assaulted into Orang, which was north of Mongol Kuri. I later commanded the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, which was an air assault infantry battalion, about 1,200, and that was my role.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from Captain Douglas Cohn.
When I went for the physical to go to West Point, the minimum height was 5'6", and if it weren't for my socks, I wouldn't have made it. We got to Vietnam, and I commanded the 2nd Platoon and the Recon Platoon, the Bravo Company, 5th of the 7th, from the 1st Cav Division, which are the 2 platoons featured in the film today. And I first was hit when a helicopter crashed in a combat situation. I got nicked by the blade. Next, I got hit by a mortar round, and my last time I took multiple gunshot wounds. And all of this is relevant to my entrance into West Point, because I told my children, had I been any bigger in any direction, they wouldn't be here. Which is why I now believe that the minimum height should now be the maximum height.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from Colonel Michael Clough.
I returned to Vietnam as a company commander assigned to the 3rd Amphibious Tractor Battalion. We had an area south of Danang protecting the enemy forces from getting into the Danang airfield, which was so favorably spoken about. While there, we were at the base of these mountains called Marble Mountain. If anybody's interested, I would suggest go Google Marble Mountain sometime and see. But it was a large Buddhist shrine. And I mean, it was a tremendous shrine as you get up inside the center of the mountain. Unfortunately, many snipers decided to make it their home. So I played a game for about 9 months with a sniper, in my office being right off in that mountain. shooting into my office from time to time. And unfortunately, one of my men, after a firefight started, peeked his head out the door and was killed right in front of my desk. So that is a memory that I have that lasts with me for a long time. Now, of a lighter moment, my probably most famous activity was for the Bob Hope Show. They required that we have an amphibious tractor there so that they could escape if there was some sort of an attack on the Bob Hope Show while we were there. But it was also this tractor that I had two of them down there. One of them was used as a dressing room for Rockwell Welch. So my men worshiped that tractor from there on out. So I had a fun experience in Vietnam.
Thank you, sir. We will now hear from Sergeant Michael Train.
Well, as I said, I took a rather circuitous route to get to where I was, and that wasn't actually the end. We performed all of our training at Utapao. Utapao, at the time, was the largest Air Force base in the world. I was told by the colonel who was in charge of our operations, there were personnel who had been on that base 4, 5, and 6 years who had no idea where we were training on that base. They'd never been out that far. But that's when we performed all of our preliminary training as to what we were going to do. From there, we went up north to Nang Kham Phanam at the Royal Thai Air Force Base and performed all of our operations directly out of there. That was right almost smack in the middle between Udan and Udorn, the two Air Force bases where we had B-52s and other equipment flying out of. The 563 mission count were not all rescue missions. We performed other tasks. We gathered intelligence, and in some cases performed other operations based on what we found while we were out there. We flew every day, 7 days a week. The only time we didn't fly is if the weather was just so inclement we couldn't get off the ground. We were known from time to time to have a low ceiling, and we would go straight up and pop through the ceiling and head out on our day. Because by the time we got to where we were going, it burned off, and by the time we came back, it was gone. So it was a little scary at times. As you're going up, you're counting and trying to figure out, okay, when are we going to break through? We did do night missions. I hated night missions. The reason for that is you have to fly at a higher altitude. We didn't have all the fancy avionics that they have now, so we had to get high enough so that we didn't smack into a hillside somewhere. The downside of that is that gave them more time to pick us out from the ground. During the day, we'd fly maybe 2 feet off the tops of the trees. The sound of the helicopter would echo. And by the time they figured out where we were going. But at night, when I speak at schools up in Pennsylvania, I tell them, you have not lived until you look out the door of your helicopter at night and see tracers coming right up at you. I said, all I did was I took and pinpointed the door gun at where the tracers were coming from. I said, they usually stopped. I said, I don't know if I scared them or got them, but I said, as long as it stopped, I didn't care. But night missions were not my favorite mission. We did an awful lot of other types of missions, but by and large, that 563, probably 2/3 of that were all rescue missions. We did pick up some pilots who were ordered, because they couldn't make it out, to dump in Cambodia. And the response always was, say again? And they said, trust us. The first thing that happened was every piece of aircraft we had in the air, everybody started looking for it. And as soon as we realized where they were, we would zoom in and try, effect a rescue. We never lost anybody. We didn't get that many happening, but we never lost anybody. And they were rather shocked that this helicopter would come in and land right next to them after they hit the ground. I was like, how did you know we're here? But those were the amusing times when you picked those guys up to look on their face. It took them like 10 minutes before that look went away. That's pretty much what I did while I was there. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is directed to 3 of our participants. How do you feel the media covered the Vietnam War? Do you feel they presented an accurate picture of it? As well as, motion pictures that would take place in years that follow. We'd like to first hear from General Vesser.
I think that their coverage was complicated. I think at the grunt, that is at the soldier level and at the small unit leader level, they called it the way it was and gave the American public a good picture of what the war was like. But they made mistakes that had serious consequences for our country. For instance, during the Buddhist crisis, they blamed Zim and his brother Nu for things that they had not done, which resulted ultimately in the overthrow and his assassination. Neil Sheehan's A Bright Shining Lie about John Vann, I knew John Vann well, portrayed those aspects of his character which were less admirable. And I've gone back and researched both the New York Times and other things that says that the press got it wrong at the time and Sheehan was partly responsible. But John Vann was an individual who dedicated his life to the Vietnamese people and was in Vietnam as a civilian for many years working for Corps. With respect to Cambodia, I think that the press failed to report the North Vietnamese of Cambodia. When we went into Cambodia, when we went down to Mongol Curie, we made certain that we had reporters embedded in units that went in there because the North Vietnamese had already looted the place, and we wanted to be certain that they didn't blame American soldiers for that. I think that General Abrams did a great job not just proving that I had been wrong about pacification, that with the right leadership pacification was possible. It certainly wasn't possible when I volunteered to go out and join the fighters, but he got it right with the press. Unlike General Westmoreland, who was always trying to polish his personal image and deny that American soldiers could be ambushed, General Abrams believed that our best approach with the press was to tell it like it was. So I feel that the press served a real service in terms of bringing war to the American people. But it's a very complex situation. The fog of war was very real.
Thank you. We will now hear from Colonel Michael Clough.
My experience with the press in Vietnam was we only saw them when there was some situation. So you heard the statement the other day in the news, if it bleeds, it reads. That's about what my experience was. If we had stacks of bodies piled up, they came. But if normal day types of operations, you just didn't see them. So I think there was a misinformation that was coming out because of their aggressiveness of looking for things that were very bad. And it didn't show actually the everyday life of people, military people serving in Vietnam. So I think they lost that piece. And it's unfortunate, I think, because there was so much of what happened there. Our relationship with the villages, how we treated the villagers who had all kinds of diseases and stuff. My first mission was to go out with a MedCap team, a doctor, a dentist, and a number of corpsmen. I provided the security. We went into the village. They did work for about 4 or 5 hours and we came out. That's my first job. So they didn't see that part in the press. What they saw were the piles of bodies, and after a big battle, that was it. I think they missed a lot.
We will now hear from Captain Douglas Cohn. United States Army.
The film you're going to see today is, in my opinion, the most accurate film I've ever seen on Vietnam. Doesn't mean it's the most dramatic or it's the most well acted, because the actors are all the actual participants. But if you compare and contrast it with the types of movies that have come out on the war, it's quite moving. I'll never forget when the movie Platoon came out, and there was a write-up in the Washington Post about it, and a young teenager said to his writer father, said, "I never realized that Americans were so bad, that they did all these awful things and so forth and so on." In other words, this person was deriving from that movie an opinion of what actually he thought happened, when of course that's not what happened. Does that mean that there were no crimes committed in Vietnam? Of course there were. There were crimes committed in every war. But I can tell you that for those people who were fighting in the jungle, these were not people on drugs. These were not people who were killing civilians. These were not people who were burning down villages. That's not what was going on at all. The real fighting in Vietnam, where we were in the jungle and we would have contact on balance every 3 days, it was down, dirty, and vicious, and it was close. But it did not involve civilians. It did not involve drugs. It did not involve all these things that they tried to depict in the movies. The film today, and I'm not going to give the film away, so the film today, though, shows, if nothing else, the way it really was.
Thank you, Captain. Our next question. Where were you at the time of the Tet Offensive? How did this event impact the war? We'll hear first from Colonel Michael Clough.
I was stationed south of Marble Mountain, and in the Danang area, Tet was a lot different than most folks read about in the papers. I woke up startled at night when there was a large attack on our compound. They got inside the wire. My wife had sent me some heart shorts that I had in my locker, and I had all my skivvies were in my ammo can being washed. So I didn't have anything else to wear, so I put these on and hit the rack. Well, about 3 in the morning, we were hit. So here I am with helmet, flak jacket, pistol, and hard shorts going to the boat. My battalion commander saw me and sort of laughed, and my only comment was, I hope I don't get hit, because if I'm down there on the morgue, these guys are going to have a picnic. The Tet Offensive in Danang was totally different than in the other areas, and I can tell you, I have pictures that show you how we decimated the North Vietnamese. I mean, we stacked them up. They tried to attack from the north with 2 divisions. They were coordinating with the division that came up from the south, where I was at, and what happened, they didn't get it together. And as a result, the 2 divisions from the north were held up, and the 1 division where I was at came up, and we just leveled them. So we saw a different picture of what was going on. Yeah, it was intense. There was a lot of firing going on, but we were in complete control all the time. And the press, I think, picked that up, and then that's when we began to see, as I read later, began to see the war and the nature of the war change. I can tell you, they did not win that piece of the battle.
Thank you. We'll now hear from Colonel Carl Fontenot.
I think the night before before Wave fell, my command post received about 30 or 40 rounds of rockets. We did all right. The CB battalion didn't do too well. They got most of it. They somehow, when they constructed that command post, the CBs were managed to get themselves placed where the rounds always came in. I don't know why, but they were great guys, and they used my homemade fire truck very frequently to put out all the burning huts after the shells came in. Anyway, what we found out the following morning was that 2 regiments had taken way. And I have to say that this Tet Offensive, or this Tet period, the 3rd Division, 3rd Marine Division, knew that they were being infiltrated. However, Saigon was not willing to permit firing at these groups of infiltrators that our scouts saw coming in. They were coming in from groups fairly large, which was supposedly prohibited. They went into Wade, about 2 regiments, that's probably around 5,000. Along with the local DC, they took the city on 31 January at 3:40 in the morning. 10 hours later, 2 companies of Marines, with the last 4 tanks I had in my battalion, 2 flame and 2 gun, went in and relieved the MACV compound and got right into their faces. For 14 days, those 4 tanks, later 3 when one was knocked out completely, stood there, expended 1,147 rounds of 90 millimeter, 115,000 rounds of 50 caliber, 153,000 rounds of 30 caliber, were hit themselves 28 times by weapons that penetrate tanks, anti-tank weapons, and suffered 14 wounded and 1 KIA. That's almost all of the tank crewmen. It was a fierce fight. After about 14 days, they were reinforced by large quantities of more Marines, and the 3 battalions beat the NBA decisively. However, that didn't get big coverage on the national scene, needless to say. I think that this particular, not just Wade, but the whole of this finished off the war as far as we were concerned. We decisively beat the NBA eventually through, at this time, through all of the areas, really. They suffered over 40,000 in casualties. There was no reason to cease the war at that point, but I think we lost the political will, the will of the people to pursue this war any further. I think they were appalled by the fact that the North Vietnamese and the local Viet Cong could rise such an attack throughout the country. But that's just a personal opinion.
Thank you. We will now talk about the return home. What sort of treatment did you receive?
Excuse me, I'd like to make a comment on
Sure.
that particular section. I want to try to put that one in a bit more historical perspective, if I may. A lot has been said that the Tet Offensive was a turning point in the war because that's when the American public turned against the war. And it's pretty well known that the Tet Offensive was an American victory. We practically destroyed the Viet Cong. We severely defeated the North Vietnamese. But we also took some very high casualties. So who was at fault for that? And frankly, the fault really lies at the feet of General Westmoreland. Because Westmoreland, up until that time, had said that we were winning the war, that we had the enemy on the run, that things were going well. And the mere fact that the enemy could mount such an offensive is what turned public opinion against the war at that time. And that's where the real problem lies. And so as the Colonel Harry Summers wrote, he was a famous war historian from the War College. He said he met with a North Vietnamese colonel afterwards, after the war, and he said, you know, we never lost a battle. And the North Vietnamese colonel said, yes, that's true, but so what? And that was what happened with the Tet Offensive. They lost the battle, but they won it strategically. And that would not have happened, I don't believe, under General Abrams.
Thank you. Now with the return home, we will first hear from Lieutenant Jack Hannon. Lieutenant?
I I think chronologically this is the right order because we came home only 3 months into the big war in mid-1965, and as General Salisbury has told you, the units coming home in the mid-60s got a much different reception than those coming back in the mid-70s. Imagine this big carrier, sailors in clean uniforms for once, lining the decks, all flags flying, sailing under the Golden Gate Bridge and around through the harbor to the carrier pier in Alameda. The fireboats came out to greet us and sent their plumes of water skyward 100 feet or more. There were plenty of people out on the Golden Gate Bridge. The families were waiting in Alameda. There were no demonstrators. And a local television station was at Moffett Field interviewing the commander of our A-1 squadron who was based there. Also on the bridge was a very pretty redhead whom I had met only a week before sailing off on this 9-month deployment, and who in a phone call from Hawaii, and there were very few circuits from Hawaii to the U.S. at that time, 80 circuits for the whole state, had agreed to have dinner with me. And she didn't tell me about this for a long time after that. Ladies and gentlemen, 18 months later, we were married at the chapel at the University of Virginia. And next year is our 50th anniversary. So it was a good and personal. And you can see I still get emotional about it, and why not?
Thank you, sir. We'll now hear from Lieutenant Colonel Carl Fountaino.
I didn't come back on that aircraft carrier, but we came back on a chartered, nice civilian aircraft. Very comfortable, very pleasant, and we went into Hawaii. In Hawaii, we found that we had to go through the customs. And of course, customs at that time of day, it was fairly late in the day, was closed. Well, they started trying to rustle up somebody for customs. Most of the troops were kind of hoping they'd see a couple of hula girls and maybe get a lei or something around their neck. What they got was first an extended delay by customs, and then when customs finally got there, they were very rude. They didn't open immediately. They said, well, we've got a regular aircraft we have to take in first. So they took another aircraft. And we did manage to restrain the people from our people from going after all of these. But once they processed all of the civilians off the aircraft, then they took us. And I thought they were quite rude. What the officers and I did, we went upstairs and first we found the aircraft company, whoever was there representing it. We complained bitterly and suggested to them that we complained bitterly to the customs people if we could find anybody in charge. But at any rate, I was really distressed because my orders were for Hawaii for my next duty station. And I just hoped that this was not the way everything functioned in Hawaii. However, it didn't. The station was quite pleasant.
Thank you, sir. We'll now hear from Staff Sergeant Michael Train.
Where shall I begin? When I left, the public was really behind the war effort. I'll tell you a short story. A friend of mine and I were traveling back to Connecticut, and we pulled into Grand Central Terminal. We walked out one side of the terminal, and there was a ban the bomb demonstration going on. I said, well, maybe we better go the other way. We walked out the other side, going up the other side of the terminal, in the opposite direction was a bomb Hanoi demonstration going on. And I said, we can't get away from this. I said, well, we got caught up in it. They picked us up, put us on their shoulders, carried us down the street put us in a little restaurant, made sure they paid for our meals and everything else. I said, well, I guess there's still some good people here. When I went, as I said, the public was 100% behind it. Being stationed at Danang, we received very, very little word from the outside world. That was by design. They wanted us to concentrate and remain focused on what we were doing. Between the time I got there and the time I got home, the American public had done a 180. I didn't know it. I was on an airplane and there was a businessman sitting next to me and he says, "You're on your way home?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I'd change into my civilian clothes if I was you." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "You'll find out." Well, I figured this guy knows something more than I do. So as soon as I deplaned, I headed for the nearest vendor. I never made it. Somebody walking in the other direction leaned over and spit on me and called me a baby girl. I didn't even respond. I couldn't. I was just mortified. I went to the men's room, I cleaned my uniform off, put on civilian clothes. I never wore my uniform in public ever again. My mother picked up on that right away. I would come home in civilian clothes all the time, and she said, "I thought you were proud." I said, "I am." And then I told her, I said, "Well, they told us because of the public's viewpoint, they don't want us traveling in uniforms anymore." And that was very true in a lot of bases. A friend of mine here can let you in on that later on. But that was my welcome home. I didn't get welcome home to have anybody say anything to me in a positive light for 26 years. I finally had a t-shirt on one time that I had made that says, "Remember Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos." And I was in a flea market or something, and this elderly gentleman got up and walked over and shook my hand. He said, "It's about time you guys started sticking your chest out and being proud." I said, "I was never not proud." I said, "But there were times if I had this t-shirt, I probably would have got the, you know what, kicked out of me." And he apologized. I said, "You have nothing to apologize for. You thanked me." And he said, "Welcome home." That meant the world to me. And that's what happened to me when I came home.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Captain Kun.
I came home on a stretcher, and in some respects there's a benefit in that because there's a transition period that you can go through in the hospital where some folks coming directly from combat back into civilian life, it was more of a startling situation. But when I got out of the hospital after 6 months, I was in a wheelchair in my father's office overlooking Broadway in Portland, Oregon. And there was a parade coming by, and so they wheeled me over to the window, and it turned out to be an anti-war parade, and they were carrying the American flag upside down, and they were waving the North Vietnamese flag. And I have to confess, I was very irritated at the time, but later came to the conclusion that this is actually part of what we were fighting for, because after all, you can imagine such a demonstration could never have taken place in North Vietnam. The other side of the coin was that I found that coming home as a young bachelor, the girls that were around at the time didn't seem to care about the political ramifications, and they got past that. So the young bachelors at that time seemed to be in high demand, regardless of the political aspect. And one of those young women, who actually was supporting the war, her father was in the Battle of the Bulge, became my wife. And of course, she was wearing a miniskirt at the time, and now I'm going to embarrass her and ask her to stand up. She's sitting right over here. But without the miniskirt, we moved in married 43 years now.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will now open the floor to questions before we conclude our program. Yes?
First of all, welcome home from one vet to another. I was lucky. I had a whole bunch of family support when I was over there. Can you tell me about the support you had from your family or church or friends?
So the question is, could the members of the panel please share support networks from family and friends at home? Sir?
family support that I received was outstanding, and all through both my wife's side and my parents' side. But I would like to relate something that really kind of capped this all for me. I was on a trip to China about 3 or 4 years ago, and I'm on a river cruise, and this person comes up to me and says, "I'd like to talk to you." And he was obviously a Vietnamese. And I went aside, and he described to me, he was on the last airplane out of Saigon. He was on the last airplane out of Saigon. And he told me the ramp was down in the C-130 and there wasn't enough room for him, and they tried to force him off. And he said, "I know you're a Marine, I want to tell you this." He says, 4 Marines locked arms and grabbed a hold of and formed a human chain across that ramp so I could stay on. And they flew off. And he started crying, and it's describing to me what it meant for our service in Vietnam. That to me was a culminating point.
Thank you.
I think I have a mic here. Many of us, military and civilian, served in provinces, districts, involved in something called nation building. It's had a lot of names in a lot of different places, but I would welcome thoughts that any of the speakers might have about the implications of nation building for what's happened more recently in Afghanistan, Iraq, elsewhere.
So gentlemen, if one of you would like to speak to nation buildings, the effect that you saw in country, and then also what you've read or have seen since then in the present.
Let me just address something kind of related to it. The Marine Corps was pretty well involved in trying to pacification measures. For example, we did med caps for the local people. My battalion didn't have a doctor, so I sent corpsmen. But I did have a dentist, so we used to put a dentist on a tank and send him out to fix teeth in the local villages. We carried in all Marine battalions 3 items that were quite unusual in supply. We carried a midwife kit. That was to obviously to assist in births. We carried a kit of carpenter tools that were designed to be used by Asians. We had those made in Japan, I think, or Taiwan, one or the other. And we carried a blacksmith kit, and that was to assist the local villages. One of the villages that I had responsibility for at one time, we moved around a bit, was a resettled Viet Cong village. I will admit that I did have kind of an itch in my back when I walked through it, but nothing ever happened. They were all quite pleasant. Of course, our area was a little bit different. The 3rd Marine Division was in the 2 northern provinces. And most of the active warfare that we got into was with North Vietnamese. There were BC there, but not in the quantities I think perhaps there were in other parts of the country.
Thank you, Colonel. We have
Oh,
time.
incidentally, along the medical side, one of my corpsmen managed to construct a liaison with the ship that was off the coast. I think it was the Repose at the time. And he had found one boy who had a cleft palate, cute little fellow, about this tall. And he arranged with the ship to have this cleft palate repaired. And we put the lady, his mother, and the boy, with orders attached to them on an airplane, sent them to Danang from where we were located. And in Danang, they were able to transfer, with the orders that we wrote, out to the hospital ship. They took care of this lady and her boy, repaired the cleft palate, and sent them back to us. It took about a week. And This lady did not know one word of English. She trusted enough and had enough desire to get her son taken care of that she was willing to embark on this and put her trust in us.
Thank you, sir. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our panel discussion. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Gentlemen, thank you for your service. And let's rise again, please. Thank you. And we will have a brief announcement and then possibly a few last words before we depart. Thank you, gentlemen.
I would also like to extend our appreciation to Matt, who so ably conducted this first symposium. Thank you, Matt.